So let's get right into it. You know that feeling when you finally get the keys to a new place? You feel like you own the world, right? King or queen of your own castle. But what if I told you that your little kingdom, well, it comes with a whole set of invisible rules and ancient promises you never even made? I mean, it's a fair question, isn't it? When you buy a house, do you really own all of it? And the answer, you might be surprised to hear, is way more complex than you'd think. That piece of land, that building, even with your name on the deed, it's not quite the absolute ownership we imagine. That's the thing. Almost every single piece of property is tangled up in this web of rights and obligations. These are strings that can stretch back through decades, even centuries, connecting your home to the properties and people all around it. And there's a legal term for these strings, of course, servitudes. And I love this description from our source material on the slide. Metaphysical fixtures. Just think about that. They're not physical, you can't see them or touch them, but they are as much a part of the land as the front door or the foundation, and they get passed down from one owner to the next. Okay, to really get our heads around how this all works, let's use a classic story from property law. It's a tale of two properties, and we're going to call them Blackacre and Whiteacre. So here's the setup. Picture this duplex. Originally, it was just one property, owned by one person. But they decide to split it right down the middle and sell it as two separate homes. Blackacre on one side, Whiteacre on the other. Seems simple enough, right? Well, not so fast, because during that first sale, two very specific deals were made. First, the new owner of Blackacre, which is kind of stuck behind the other house, gets the right to use Whiteacre's driveway to get to the street. And second, the owner of Whiteacre promises they won't change the exterior paint color, to keep the duplex looking uniform. Now, here's the million-dollar question. Years go by, both homes are sold to new people, folks who had absolutely nothing to do with that original deal. So, does the new owner of Whiteacre still have to let their neighbor use the driveway? And are they really stuck with that old paint color forever? In other words, do these promises run with the land? All right, let's tackle that driveway issue first. This brings us to our first big idea, something called an easement. So what is an easement? It's basically a formal legal right to use someone else's land for a very specific purpose. You don't own it, you can't move in, but you have a legally protected right to use it. In our story, that's Blackacre's right to use the driveway on Whiteacre's property. Now, for this right to really stick and run with the land, it has to pass a kind of four-part test. As you can see here, first, you need two properties, one that benefits, that's Blackacre, and one that's burdened, which is Whiteacre. Second, the right has to actually help the land itself, not just be a personal favor to the owner. And a driveway definitely helps the land. Third, the owners have to be different people. Check. And finally, the right has to be clear enough that you could write it into a deed. So driveway access, it checks all the boxes. It's a classic easement, and yep, it sticks with the property, no matter who owns it. Okay, so the driveway situation is sorted, but what about that other deal? The promise not to change the paint color. This brings us to our second key concept, the covenant. Put simply, a covenant is just a promise that's written into a deed. It's not about using somebody else's land like an easement is. It's about what you promise you will, or importantly, won't do on your own land. And this brings us to a really crucial distinction, because covenants come in two flavors. You've got positive covenants, which are a promise to do something, like, say, keep a shared fence in good shape. And then you have negative covenants, a promise not to do something. And in our story, the owner of Whiteacre promised not to change the paint color. And believe it or not, that difference is everything. So why is that little difference so huge? Because historically, the law has said that only negative covenants, those promises not to do something, can automatically bind future owners. The courts were always a bit nervous about forcing a new owner to actively spend money or do work based on a promise a total stranger made years ago. So that promise not to paint, that's way more likely to stick than, say, a promise to paint the house every 5 years. So look, a duplex, a driveway, some paint, it might all seem like some dusty old legal puzzle, but these servitudes, easements, and covenants are absolutely everywhere. And trust me, they've shaped our modern world in some really profound ways. Just think about it for a second. Your homeowner's association rules about where you can put your trash cans or what color you can paint your door, that's a whole web of covenants. That right the power company has to run lines across the back of your yard, that's an easement.
These tools are used for everything from community planning to providing utilities and even to preserve nature. They are the invisible rulebook for our shared spaces.
But we have to be honest here. This powerful legal tool also has a really dark side to its history. For decades, covenants were used for something far more sinister.
For a huge part of the 20th century, developers used what were called restrictive covenants, specifically to stop people of certain races or religions from buying homes in particular neighborhoods. This quote from 1949 really captures how society was starting to grapple with the deep injustice of these agreements that were literally written into property deeds all across North America.
Thankfully, the courts did eventually step in. Landmark rulings declared these kinds of covenants totally unenforceable, and it was a powerful statement, an affirmation that property rights are not absolute. They can't be used as a weapon to violate basic principles of public policy and human rights.
So, after all that, what's the big picture? What's the one thing you should really take away from all this?
At the end of the day, it's this. Owning a piece of land doesn't mean you're on an island. It means you are part of a network, a web of shared rights, of easements and covenants and responsibilities that connects you not just to your next-door neighbors, but to every single person who owned that land before you, and to the society that makes the rules. So I'll just leave you with this thought. The next time you walk or drive through a neighborhood and you see a shared driveway, or a little park, or even just a row of houses that all look a bit too similar, think about those invisible strings holding it all together. What history, what promises, and what connections are hiding right there in plain sight?